Well, it is St. George's Day.
Yay!
The 23rd of April is St. George's Day. Nearly always, although, Alex, you're saying that sometimes, because of Easter, it can fall on...
Yes, if the preceding Sunday is Easter Sunday, they move it back a bit, because obviously you've got all the Eastertide bits to do first. I think the last time that happened was 2014.
Interesting. But so today is St. George's Day, so I thought I'd talk a bit about St. George, because Lotus Cetus has been going for over 3 years now. And the last 3 years, we've sort of not really done much.
We should have done, shouldn't we?
Yeah, we really should have done, yeah. And it's probably a bit on me as well for being the resident history nerd. It's probably on me. I do something for Armistice Day every year. So last year, I really kicked myself for not doing anything on it. So this year, at least a podcast segment.
Hi folks, sorry to interrupt the video, but I just want to direct your attention to the aesthetics range of merch that we have on the store. These are beautiful images that I think work really well as posters or mugs. So if you want to support us, going over to the merch store at shop.lotuscetus.com is easily the best way other than signing up on the website.
Can I say the line?
What line?
The line that they always say.
What's that?
He's Turkish.
Oh, St. George.
Yeah, and therefore...
He's a Turk.
Reasons, we have to have infinity immigration.
Yeah.
That's what you see every St. George. I mean, I haven't looked on Twitter yet today, but I'm sure it'll be up there.
Your patron saint is a Turk.
Yes.
Therefore, you must accept
yes.
endless Somalis and Afghans and Bangladeshis into your country endlessly forever.
It's that you like foreign thing, therefore you don't exist.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
Checkmate, bigots.
So, first thing to say is there's the real historical figure of St. George of Cappadocia, or George of Cappadocia. And then there's the legend, the myth and legend built up around him.
Where's Cappadocia?
So, Cappadocia is in Anatolia, modern day Turkey.
Okay.
So, to call him Turkish is wrong. It's right and wrong. I mean, it's wrong because there was no Turkey in the 3rd century.
So
AD.
if today's borders went all the way back in time, but they don't.
To the Roman times, so the 3rd century AD.
Oh, right. Okay.
So he died in about 300 AD. So the majority of it just after 300 AD. So he's Roman. It's Roman era.
So Byzantium.
Late antiquity. So he lived and died under the reign of Diocletian, who's a couple of emperors before, or just before Constantine. And it's Constantine's reign that really leads to Constantinople, Byzantium, becoming the capital of the Roman Empire, at least the eastern portion of it. So it's just before really the Byzantine period era. It's Roman. It's late antiquity. It's Roman.
Okay.
He's Roman.
Okay.
He was in the army, perhaps the Praetorian Guard, during the reign of Diocletian. Now, I'm fascinated by that period, the crisis of the 3rd century, and the reign of Diocletian, the Tetrarchy, the 4 Roman emperors, and then the rise of Constantine and reuniting everything. There can be only one Constantine the Great.
So if he was a Praetorian Guard, was this the bit when the Praetorian Guard had gone a bit iffy? Because they were a bit iffy, weren't they?
Yeah.
They were in the iffy phase at this point.
I think the bit where the Praetorian Guard were a bit iffy was just called Roman history, wasn't it?
Well, yes, I suppose so.
Well, it's after Constantine finally, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, finally takes control of the whole Western Empire and the city of Rome itself, that he disbands the Praetorians at that point.
Yeah.
The last remnants of the Praetorians are killed at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge just outside Rome on the River Tiber, about a generation after St. George was supposed to have lived. Now, I say supposed because he probably is a real historical figure, but he might not be. But he probably is. He probably is. However, the legend of him, because, a lot of the iconography, a lot of the images of him, he looks like a knight, a medieval knight, something like a Knight Templar. So how can that be? Well, I want to just try and talk about that a bit, try and peel the onion, all the various layers between history and myth and how we end up with that. So, so he is a saint. So that is a Catholic thing. That's in the Catholic tradition. Oh, and Eastern Orthodox and Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox.
So my understanding of being a saint is that you need to have performed a miracle of some sort.
Well, no, not necessarily. It's just up to the popes or patriarch to canonize you as a saint.
Yeah, you'll have to have done something exceptional.
Okay.
Probably. I mean, Mother Teresa didn't really do anything.
Yeah.
Well, she got good PR.
Exceptional.
Yeah, she had an exceptional brand.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So, and of course, the history of very early Christianity is rich pickings for saints because there's all sorts of fabulous things happening. It's also the time period of the Diocletian repression. and it's the sort of that interesting moment where Christianity is still not an underground cult, but has not been accepted as a mainstream thing yet. And
Right.
essentially, Diocletian sort of flips his lid at them because he's one of the things I heard was he was passing through to go and fight the Persians, and was
Right.
obviously going up to the temples and trying to consult the oracles and predict the future and trying to invest himself in the old Roman gods. And there's always these bloody Christians behind him making the sign of the cross. He's you're clouding the judgment of the oracles. I can't commune with the gods if you're sat there doing all your Christian nonsense. And he eventually just decides just to persecute them.
Right. Okay.
Just, right, out.
So yeah,
Yes.
absolutely right. There is this period of sort of the early Christian martyrs, where again Constantine, about a generation later, was famously right at the end of his death, sort of right at the end of his life, sort of made Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire. Until then, there'd been a period of a couple of hundred years or more of sort of the rise of Christianity, the very early Christian period. Different emperors felt differently about these things. Some persecuted Christians heavily, some not so much.
So
Diocletian went through a period of having a lot of them martyred for basically not giving lip service to the other cults, the cult of the emperor himself and things.
So
the
when
Christians-
did the Pontifex Maximus of Rome flip over to being the Pope?
Oh, that's a good question. Difficult to answer.
Right.
That's difficult to
Because that's the guy.
Some people still call the Pope.
But yeah, but I know it's sort of merged or whatever. But isn't that the guy who hands out the sainthoods? So don't you need somebody the Pontifex Maximus to have made that flip in order for this guy to become a saint?
Well, the first Pope is St. Peter. That's supposed to be how it is.
Right.
So there was a period where you would have a pagan Pontifex Maximus and a Pope in inverted commas at the same time.
Right.
So there's not just a clean, suddenly the Pontifex Maximus stops being and then we start having popes. It wasn't as simple as that.
Oh, okay. There was a bit of a
and
job
then-
share going on. For a while.
Yeah, right.
Right.
It's all that sort of it being very Roman. There's a period where they try and officiate the church. They essentially try and make it a body of the Roman government, and that all comes after Constantine the Great. And that's where they actually set up the like administration of the church and make it an official body where the Pope becomes a proper position.
We have things like the councils of Nicaea, for example, again under Constantine, where they try and they work out really what their doctrine is going to be and what type of ecclesiastical structures they're going to have, and they go on for centuries. Well, you still have them occasionally nowadays, very occasionally. A synod where all the powers that be in the church get together and decide things when they need to. But also, to throw a little bit more complication on top of that, there's been various schisms down through the ages. So, like the Eastern Orthodox Church isn't the same as Rome, is it? They've got they've got their own patriarch.
Yeah, they seem quite based to me.
There's all these different things. But anyway, getting slightly off track from St. George. I just did want to mention that it is in the Western tradition anyway, a Catholic thing, and Britain is, at least since the age of good Queen Bess, the Virgin Queen, we've been Protestant, haven't we? But nonetheless, St. George's Cross is our flag, and but the thing I first want to mention is that he's only been our patron saint since the 14th century, since the age of Edward III, who was a martial king. He's very much into his wars, as old Edward III. So before Edward III, our patron saint was the Confessor, St. Edward the Confessor, an earlier king of ours. And then before that, we would have didn't necessarily have a patron saint, but we liked St. Dunstan, who is a proper English one, or St. Edmund the Martyr, an earlier one.
So Edward III kind of thought, I don't fancy that, but let's go shopping for a better patron saint. And
quite literally, because St. Edward the Confessor represents sort of piety, not war.
Yes,
Edward the Confessor was famous for not being warlike, and Edward III wanted a more warlike patron saint.
And Edward III is also the sort of high watermark of the chivalric tradition. So he sets up the Order of the Garter, which of course still survives to this day. It's that officiate where all the heraldry and all the rules around the standardization of heraldry comes from. It's also the sort of time that the three lions become the official English symbol. And it's that sort of, we want to go and bash the French. I've got my group of mates, and we're going to be the Order of the Garter, because that's all it is, essentially, is a sort of drinking.
I see.
Very long history. And then we need an emblem, and we need a mascot. and the mascot is the patron saint.
Right. No, I'm getting it. I'm getting it now. So, I mean, obviously, you've got to go and fight the French. Obviously,
because Edward III is the 100 Years' War, the first portion really of it.
I see.
Right, his son, the Black Prince, smashing them at Poitiers.
And you needed to upgrade the propaganda, the narrative, in order to get more French bashing done.
Yes.
This
is also the period, of course, where this sort of Anglo-Norman aristocracy properly folds itself into Englishness. It's also about the time that the aristocracy stop using French and start using English. So that's the sort of, we're just as English as you are, even though, we're descended from...
and to prove it, we're going to go and get the Frenchies.
Yes.
So if you were shopping around for a new patron saint, you'd be looking for sort of one of the more martial saints. So different saints are sort of connected to different things.
Right.
For example, I don't know, St. Christopher's patron saint of like travellers and pilgrims and sailors and things.
Right.
So if you want
actual travel. Yeah, okay.
Right. And so there's various sort of martial, military, soldier-like saints.
Yes.
Well, not a saint, but the Archangel Michael is one of the main ones. You'd sort of invoke his name if he was going on crusade.
Could you have him as a patron saint? Because
the Germans do.
Right.
Oh, right.
He's the patron saint, and the 1918 offensive is called the Michael Offensive after.
They get a celestial being. I mean that. Yeah.
So yeah.
And there are other ones. I mean, St. Theodore. Was St. Theodore of Tyro is one of them. In fact, a lot of his legend is mixed up with St. George. There's St. James, or as the Spanish call him, Santiago, Matamoros, the Moor Slayer. He's a very warlike one.
The Moor Slayer,
St. James, Santiago.
So he slayed the Algerians and stuff, did he?
He helped the Moors out of Spain.
Yeah, he helped.
Well, I mean, he sounds useful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the Spanish love St. James. He's their boy.
Yeah.
Right.
So the French have got St. Louis for reasons I don't quite understand.
Yeah, not as cool.
Not as cool.
What was he into? Like brie and
nice wines.
Right. Okay.
Chalets and things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Skiing.
Praying. 1980s.
So when did the dragon get killed?
Okay, so just before I move on to that, just one last thing, I suppose, because I've actually gone through a fair bit of time already. Just to mention that he's a Roman soldier, basically, that was Christian and under the Diocletian persecutions was martyred for sort of refusing, like a good Christian, refusing to give up his beliefs, even when he could relatively easily have done so, and was tortured for 7 years, almost certainly nonsense, and in the end beheaded for that. So he's a Christian martyr.
He's a stubborn chap, isn't he?
Very stubborn, yeah, putting up with torture for 7 years.
Another bit of the English character is apparently he laboured under these great trials with great humour. One of the stories is that the emperor gave him some iron boots to wear with nails up through his feet. And when the emperor said, how'd you like them apples? He went, well, it's very kind of you to give me some in the correct size. And they buried him in a pit of lime for 3 days. And when he popped out, he went sort of, oh, yeah, that was nice. And skipped away.
Is that all you got?
Yeah. Come on then.
Bring it on.
Yeah.
No, so said to have had a crown of incorruptibility, like a lot of the martyrs. You could not break their will. You just could not do it. That's their raison d'etre.
Yeah.
And so he's got all sorts of things connected to him. He's obviously the dragon slayer, the trophy bearer, the son of the truth.
Yeah, you're skimming over the dragon slayer. That's a big deal for me.
I'll get there. In fact, no, let's just skip ahead to that. So that's the real historical figure, perhaps.
Yeah.
Then you've got centuries really of myth and legend and all sorts of things, and the image of certain martyrs and certain saints being used and reused, and their narratives and their stories slightly fiddled with or added to, and all sorts of things. And that's the nature of myth and legend, isn't it?
Yes.
Take for example someone like Robin Hood. Did he live during the age of John and Richard I, or did he live during the age of sort of Edward I? Did he live in the age of the early Tudor period? Did he live in Nottingham or Sherwood or what was it? It's all sort of. There's just many layers of not firm fact, shall we say?
Right. Okay.
Right. So, just to skip ahead, then I suppose there's so many other things could be said about it. Just one quick thing before I get on to the final: the Golden Legend, where he's suddenly sort of an 11th, 12th century knight in plate armor with a lance, slaying dragons all over the shop. Before we get there, just say St. George, we're not the only one who venerates St. George or has him as a patron saint.
Oh, really?
There's also Georgia, the country of Georgia, not the American state. Ukraine.
Really?
Yeah. Malta, Bosnia-Herzegovina, sorry. Ethiopia, of all places. He's got a lot of connections with North Africa, which I'll get into in a moment. Even in Catalonia and Aragon. Moscow revere and venerate.
Do you think the Barcelona football team, they've got St. George's cross in the crest because he's the patron saint of Barcelona?
Yeah. So he's a famous, well-liked, well-known saint. It's not weird in any way that Edward III, and thus us to this day, put a lot of emphasis on St. George.
Right.
Okay. So, by the 13th century, well, about the 1260s, the golden legend, in so-called, was put together by Jacob de Voragine, who was Archbishop of Genoa, an Italian man, who put together an anthology of just lots and lots of stories and apocrypha around all sorts of saints. And, of course, St. George is in there. And one of the stories put together then, so 13th century, is all about slaying the dragon. And that has passed down to us, not unbroken, not unchanged. But in the Tudor period, at one point, there was bits added to it and stuff. But that's where we get the story of St. George, in inverted commas, who was actually a 3rd century Roman from Cappadocia, i.e. Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. He's suddenly in North Africa, in Libya. He turns up, and there's a damsel in distress, and he saves her. And that's where... So,
like Killing a Dragon.
Yeah. So the story is, there was a dragon near Selene, the town of Selene, in Libya. There's a massive dragon, lived in a pond just outside their town, and he was insisting on being fed. So the townspeople would bring him a sheep every day, and then he insisted on 2 sheep, and then 3 sheep, and then that still wasn't enough. So they ran out of sheep.
Yeah,
sheep rather. The plural sheep is sheep, isn't it?
Yeah.
They ran out of sheep, and so they had to feed him somehow. So, the kids, the child folk of the town have to be sacrificed by lottery, a bit like in Hunger Games.
How big was this bloody town? I mean,
well, yeah.
If you run out of sheep that fast, you're going to run out of children faster. I would have thought.
Yeah. That's inflation for you.
Well, yes.
And in the end, even the king's daughter, the princess, by lot, was chosen to be fed to the dragon. The king didn't want to, obviously, but all his people have sacrificed so much, you can't really say no. So they dress her up as a bride. Don't ask. Oh, yeah, as you obviously would do that. Anyway, they dress her up as a bride, send her out, tie her to a stakes, and leave her there so the dragon can come out of his pond. And
does that happen to be the moment when St. George comes galloping over the hill?
Exactly the moment.
That's convenient.
When a sort of 11th century, 12th century, in the style of a Templar, really. I mean, even the Templar cross it's not exactly the same as the modern cross of St. George, but it's a white background with a red cross. Basically, St. George turns up. Again, completely, they don't have a great sense of history in the 13th century. So they wouldn't necessarily, if it's supposed to be St. George, they wouldn't make him seem like a 2nd century Roman. He just appears as a 12th century knight with a lance. And
well, presumably his Roman clothes had worn out at that point, and he would have had to have had them replaced.
Yeah, right.
He stopped off at some sort of heavenly Marks and Spencers before he.
Yes.
Like James Bond, he's just eternal. He never ages. If anything, sometimes he gets a bit younger.
Yeah.
No, I don't. Yes. I'll make it up. So he fights the dragon. He saves her.
Okay.
And he fights the dragon.
So
doesn't kill it in the first instance. Go on.
I'm thinking there's 3 possibilities here.
Yeah.
1, this actually happened.
I mean, that's the correct one.
Yeah. 2.
Sorry.
2. They just made it up. And 3, this whole thing is a clever allegory for something else.
More serious people say that it's an allegory for sort of the endless fight between good and evil, or light and dark, that sort of thing.
So who do we think the princess is, and who is the dragon?
Well, again, just sort of goodness and righteousness, and sort of the forces of darkness and evil.
Which is probably why she's in a wedding dress, because they like doing that. This is also the sort of high point of a lot of Gothic fiction. So when you look at medieval fiction, there's an awful lot of demons and damsels in distress and all that, and all the great Arthurian legend stuff. That all comes from this point as well. So all you do is you take an Arthurian legend and say, and he came down from heaven.
Well, one other thing I need to say before I sort of move on and wrap it up, because I want to give you Alex plenty of time, is that there is this long tradition. How do we get from the 2nd or 3rd century AD to suddenly the 13th century AD? Where's the dragon come from? What? Well, there's just this long tradition, again, over centuries of sort of the Thracian horsemen or the Roman cavalry spearing or lancing serpents. That was just an image. That's just a thing that was done, right? That slowly morphs into sort of more like knights, proto 8th, 9th century knights spearing bigger lizards, bigger serpents. It just keeps morphing until you get.
I can see a bunch of soldiers getting together bragging. It's like, I speared an anaconda or something, and then the next guy's like, yeah, I speared a really big anaconda, and then the other guy's is like, oh yeah, I had a bloody dragon, I did. So you can see how it's
1,000 years of I caught a fish and it was this big.
Yeah, yes, that.
Well, also there's this thing that in the scripture, in the image of the serpent, in the Garden of Eden, the serpent is bad and evil and should be slayed. That's the correct thing to do. And a horseman or a knight is a force for good and justice and righteousness. So it just makes sense that a knight killing some sort of serpent type creature, or a dragon, it's exactly as you say, an allegory for good versus evil, in all sorts of ways. Okay, so to carry on with the story, he defeats the dragon with his lance and shield,
right?
But doesn't kill it in the first instance. He takes the princess's girdle, or maybe corset or something, puts it round the dragon's neck, and they're able to lead it off like a tame dog back to the city. They've defeated it and controlled it. They take it back to the town of Selene, and the townspeople want him to kill it. Like, why have you brought? Well, we don't necessarily want it tamed. We want it dead. And he said, well, I will kill it. I will cut its head off for you if you all convert to Christianity real quick. And they do. And everyone lives happily ever after. And he chops its head off and everyone lives happily.
The hard sell. Yes. Right. Quite clever, though.
And then over the next few centuries, things get added here and there. Like her name, in the first instance, she doesn't have a name and she gets given a name. And then some say it wasn't in Selene in Libya. It was in Egypt, actually. And then just more and more details, like he's got a sword and then the sword gets a name, Ascalon, and so on, until, like by the 16th century, by the age of the Tudors or William Shakespeare, he can quite happily put in the mouth of Henry V, cry Harry and St. George, by that point. So, so there's centuries, I've skated over centuries and centuries, over 1,000 years of layer upon layer of
narrative
history
building.
And myth and legend and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But I'll bring it to an end about there. But so just to say that's why he's our patron saint, and that's why we've got the St. George's Cross still. And long may it last. Right?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as Common Sense Crusade with Calvin Robinson. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Twitter at lotuseaters_com on Twitter. Thank you and goodbye.